start us off, we're delighted to announce that Europe's bio revolution starts right here, right now. And I'm delighted to welcome to the stage Dr. Claire Skentelbery, Director General of EuropaBio. Claire, please.
Thank you very much indeed. And it's very much not often that I get called simply delightful or whatever it was, the kind words that Paul used. Not my children, not anybody call me that. So thank you very much indeed for the invitation to open the conference today. And I promise I will not take the full 30 minutes. You have better things to do than listen to that. So my name is Claire Skentelbery, and I'm Director General of EuropaBio, which is the industry association representing innovative bioindustries across Europe. But in fact, we sit with a global footprint because biotechnology as a science, as a market, is indeed a global endeavour. And I've used a very 90s song title here to introduce my presentation, and I was extremely glad to hear a bit of Oasis earlier, which sets the tone nicely for the era in which I come from. So let me tell you a bit about what we're going to do today. It's incredibly important that biotechnology is delivered to its maximum impact. This is a business conference, but for biotechnology, business is never far away from the legislative and regulatory ecosystem in which it must be delivered. And it's incredibly important for us at EuropaBio that everybody is part of building the ecosystem in which biotechnology can be matured commercially. And it's often a bit of a tough gig talking about policy in a business conference. Indeed, last year I had to go and talk about policy for biotechnology just after somebody had described how they diagnosed and saved a child's life in a 48-hour period. So then I had to set up and go, so, policy. But it cannot be as difficult as that. So I'm going to give you a small introduction to EuropaBio, and then I'm going to talk about how the landscape is changing quite substantially in Europe for biotechnology now, both in the EU and other countries such as the UK. So EuropaBio has been around for just over 30 years now, and it really reflects the ecosystem in which biotech must be delivered to market. It has three main missions. First mission is, of course, to build the right legislative and regulatory framework in which your science can make it to market at scale. The second is to make sure that biotechnology is visible and recognised. So often it is the secret power behind the products that you use on a day-to-day basis. And it's our job to help policymakers and consumers understand the role that it plays in their everyday lives. And finally, we need to get biotech in action. It's about creating intellectual property, at securing finance, enabling capacity. These three things go hand in hand, and together these make up the mission of EuropaBio. We're cross-sectoral, so we do this with an amazing group of organisations. We have a healthcare council, which is really all about frontier biotechnology in healthcare, and that's amazing to see in action and how it's revolutionising what healthcare looks like. Our Industrial Biotech Council is what brings us here today, and that's an incredibly it's expanding and growing incredibly quickly as the biotechnology finds its way into more and more industrial process and more applications. It really is truly amazing to watch how it is spreading across sectors. And finally, we have an equally amazing National Associations Council, which sits today with 32 national and regional biotechnology associations within it. And I'm super glad to see both BIA and Holland Bio here, and I think we have Lithuania Bio here as well. So truly, we can speak together as a single voice for biotechnology. We support that with an SME platform, because SMEs tell a great story. You are not looking at a 20-year cash flow, you are looking at You're not looking at a 20-year strategy, you're looking at a 6-month cash flow. And that makes a really big difference when you talk to the people that shape the policy and legislation in which your science will grow. And very finally, we have a biomanufacturing platform, because the best way to reach new people is to talk about biotech from the product back rather than the technology forward. And it has been a very effective way to reach policymakers who didn't know how much biotech impacted their areas. We live in Brussels. We also support the European Parliament with a secretariat for an MEP interest group dedicated to biotechnology and life sciences, simply because it's incredibly important that accurate and correct science underpins decision making. So you can see we're kind of trying to be everything to everybody, and it's an incredibly important job to do. And we are so glad to be with you today to help connect up how legislation works and the impact that it has on industry. So let's take a step back and look at global drivers. Many of these things will be very familiar to you and really go without saying. We're incredibly happy to see that biotechnology has grown substantially in political significance. It is more visible. It now has an identity as a unique element that drives economic delivery, drives sustainability, drives healthcare. It is understood to be a key enabling technology, and it's coming out from behind the shadows of the sectors that it sits within. But we know that the time is absolutely ripe for this biomanufacturing revolution to really find its full scale, because this is happening globally. Even before we got to COVID, where you saw huge supply chain disruption, these supply chains were already under strain, many using conventional processes, very long, very complex, very integrated, and you could see a just-in-time supply chain starting to break down when pressure is applied. And this is perfect for biomanufacturing to start to step in, to shorten supply chains, to remove exposure to risk elements. And then when we were recovering from COVID, you see a really big global repositioning about how biomanufacturing works. We have really seen in the last 5 years the revolution of China, not just as a significant supply chain player, but as a massive innovator. It has done this in healthcare, and it's doing it for industrial biotech and biomanufacturing as well. This changes the layout of the global landscape for trade, for science, for economic development. And we add into that climate change. It's placing pressure on agricultural systems, on manufacturing systems, on transport systems. We live in a new world now, and obviously we know that biomanufacturing is a way to help mitigate climate change, but it is also a way to help respond and make industries more robust. I gave up updating this slide when we got to the current geopolitical tensions, because they change on a daily basis. Sometimes they're fixed and sometimes they're not. But we're seeing now changes in energy supply and costs. We are seeing ongoing supply chain disruption, and we see obviously massive inflationary pressure in all regions. So it's incredibly important that biotechnology is brought forward and maximised as a tool to overcome many of these challenges. And I bet you didn't have 2 Italian prime ministers on your bingo card for Wednesday morning. But indeed, I introduce Enrico Letta and Mario Draghi as 2 ex-Italian prime ministers who wrote very consequential reports calling for defragmentation of the single market and a massive boost to Europe's competitiveness. These reports have been taken very seriously, and they are underpinning many of the Commission's actions now that we see to progress and simplify the EU ecosystem. So thank you, Enrico and Mario. Finally, the geopolitical circumstance, we are all familiar with this. We have tariffs. Healthcare is being hit by most favoured nation from the US, and the China 5-year plan explicitly lists the things it is going to manufacture at significant scale, many of which are already produced in Europe. So things are going to change, and they are changing quickly. So we know that biotechnology has a really excellent economic footprint, but it's very difficult to measure. So we work with the WIFO Institute in Germany to map what biotechnology looks like in terms of economic figures. These are just a few snapshots from our previous WIFO report, and we're going to update it in September and publish it to bring in data including 2024. But you can see here over years the significant impact that biotechnology has on our economic development in Europe. You can see export, significant increase over the last few years, and we expect to see that continue, at least until sort of the big COVID boom in health trails out in the stats. But we know that industrial biotechnology is one of the fastest growing export areas and growth areas for biotechnology in Europe. We know that it has its very significant gross value add impact for the European economy. And you will see the figures there again. And again, industrial biotechnology is the fastest growing area of biotechnology to contribute economically. And finally, as we all know, biotechnology is an incredibly productive technology to bring into a sector. And indeed, you see biotech sitting right at the top of the productivity charts for the EU here at over twice the EU average. And when you even move to employment in biotech is growing at 6 times the EU average. So this is literally what a knowledge-driven economy looks like. And it's our job, both at EuropaBio and for you guys as champions of this sector, to make sure that everybody knows this. So you'd think it would be an absolute no-brainer that biomanufacturing and biotechnology becomes the next big thing. It matures really quickly. It helps conventional industries stabilise and modernise. It brings new industries into play. It creates new supply chains and secures a resilient trading environment. But it's more complex than that. It has needs. And the EU itself is a very challenging market. Despite being an enormous single market, it is very fragmented for companies. And that doesn't just apply to biotechnology, it applies in lots of sectors. We know, and you will know, as keepers of the technology, that regulations and LCAs are often developed for conventional methods and conventional products. So it's very difficult often to fit biotechnology into those and come out with a number that looks anything like viable. We know that the technologies, many conventional production processes are already very efficient. They have been going for hundreds of years, and we're trying to bring a new technology in as a disruptor, as an innovator. That makes it more expensive. It makes it harder to prove its value. We know that markets in the EU are complex. Not only are there 27 member states, but countries often operate on a regional basis. I'm from Belgium, as a proud Belgian, and I know that we have at least 3 regions and multiple subunits underneath that. There's a high threshold economically for successful market entry, particularly economically. So it's incredibly important that we are able to bring biotechnology to a point where it is cost comparable. And that is going to take more policy aspects. It's not going to happen on its own. We know that the level playing field isn't really particularly level. There are very simple things that vary across member states and between sectors. So, for example, the VAT rate on plant-based milks is much higher than the VAT rate on dairy-based milks. So even if you can reach cost parity, you then sit within different tax regimes. And we all know, of course, that energy costs are a bugbear in Europe. We need to work on how we make energy more reliable, how we make it accessible, and how we make it lower cost. So these are all things that we know are barriers to how biotechnology and biomanufacturing become embedded into everyday economic activities at the scale we know it can perform at. But what we have really seen is that Europe is really waking up to this fact. And events over the last 5 years have really focused the mind, like Europe needs to use this key enabling technology to its best effect. And one of the really important reasons why it needs to use this is because it's probably the key enabling technology at which Europe has the greatest strength. There's lots of things that are very mature in other regions, but Europe has always excelled at biotechnology, and so it is incredibly logical that it drives this to be the really big technology that makes a difference for us economically. And in the current European Commission mandate, which started in 25 and runs till 29, there are multiple legislations and strategies that are going to target biotechnology. EuropaBio made the very bold ambition to cover everything that was relevant to biotechnology, and we have to say, careful what you wish for, because it is a lot. We are currently measuring over 25 different strategies and legislative files where biotechnology is either in or it impacts biotechnology. And it's our job to make sure that things are aligned, that they are progressive, that they are ambitious, and that they really make a difference to companies operating within the EU. I'm going to give you just a few examples here. And for those that don't hang around in policy very often, which is probably most of you, the legislative framework dictates everything about how your science will go to market. It will dictate if a market is open for it at all. It will dictate what the approvals process is to get to that market, how long it will take, how much paperwork you will have to do, how many times you will have to do that paperwork if you have 27 different member states. It will tell you it will set what your reporting obligations are for environmental impacts. It will talk about what your incentives are on your intellectual property protection. Every part of your journey to market is impacted by legislation somewhere. The science is the beginning of the game. It's the first 5%. 95% of the journey is dictated by what the legislative and regulatory frameworks look like. And there are some pretty cool things now on the table within the European Union. And you can see here, there's a really big set of topics that we could talk about. Some are really directly relevant to biotechnology. We have the Biotechnology Act, which is fantastic, and we are working towards this now. You have the general pharmaceutical legislation, you have the Critical Medicines Act, you have the Food and Feed Safety Omnibus, you have the NGT proposals for plants. All of these things are fundamental to how biotechnology can be used within industry. But you also have more peripheral structural legislations here. We recently saw the publication of a legislative proposal called EU Inc., which is the 28th regime, which means that a small company can set up simultaneously in all 27 member states. There's a lot of devil in the detail to go at, but this is a huge step forward in how innovation can find its way and take advantage of the full European Union rather than just the member state in which it is born. You have other elements like, I'm just going to pick one now, the European Competitiveness Fund, which is going to make a really big difference as to how you can gain and secure investment to scale and reach market. So there are lots of different elements that will impact how your science is going to be delivered. And this is the work that we do. So I'm going to talk for a few moments about the Biotech Act. This was born slightly mysteriously a couple of years ago as a footnote in a really good communication on biotech and biomanufacturing. And then it came to life at the start of this commission mandate in 2025. And then we've had indeed the first half of the EU Biotech Act, because indeed it was split in two, because why would you not do one when you can do two? The first half of the Biotech Act was published at the end of last year. It covers primarily health, but when you look at industrial biotechnology, it already makes some great progress for how we bring our science to market. So it's going to expand the way that EFSA can engage with innovators, particularly for pre-submission advice, which would make a really big difference to how good dossiers are when they formally land on EFSA's front desk. It also introduces regulatory sandboxes for innovative biotechnology, which is amazing because now we've got a way that you can co-create a regulatory pathway for biotechnology. And EFSA is not super renowned for this, so this is a really good move forward. At the moment, it's slightly restrictive, but what we're trying to do is make sure that these regulatory sandboxes cover all applications of biotechnology, including novel foods. It also proposes to introduce a low-risk tier of microorganisms, genetically modified microorganisms, for deliberate release, which again is a really big step forward, because as Europe seeks to replace synthetic pesticides, for example, it needs an alternative to move into that space, and it needs to be enabling for those technologies to progress. So you can see things are really starting to change. But there is also a Biotech Act Part 2 in the pipeline, and we have been working incredibly hard towards this. It's not due until later this year, but it is dedicated to biomanufacturing. So this is our opportunity to look at the fantastic progress that's being made and go, how do we complete this? So literally at midnight last night, myself and our amazing EuropaBio team were sitting submitting our 35-page response to the call for evidence for the Biotech Act 2. That is closing today. It's not too late to submit something if you want to. And this is saying, what do we need to change for biomanufacturing and how do we do it? So as EuropaBio, as keeper of the technology, we've looked across all the legislations and gone, where are the remaining gaps for biomanufacturing? Because it doesn't happen by accident, it doesn't happen incrementally, it doesn't happen when legislation is scattered in lots of different places. So what we want from Biotech Act 2 is we would like a completed regulatory framework for microorganisms. There's been good progress, and we can include that progress, but it needs to be coherent, it needs to be organised, it needs to be simple. We would like to see much better harmonisation across member states for regulatory approvals. I think we can all wish that, because it would substantially accelerate how we reach the full impact within the single market. We definitely want to upgrade the novel food framework, which is old and which has become highly politically polarised in recent years. It is not fit for purpose at the moment, and we really need to make sure that Europe's food supply is not hindered by a very old piece of legislation. Labelling and consumer engagement is incredibly important as well. We know that one of the big barriers to the uptake of biotechnology can be its perception. And as I finished my PhD in plant biochemistry, when the whole GM scandal hit originally, I know how that can close a sector overnight. I left plant biotechnology when I finished my PhD because there was nowhere to go. So it's incredibly important that we are clear and comprehensive and engaging for consumers. And we can do this through the Biotech Act 2. We also want to make sure we can use all elements at our disposal. There are many sources of carbon that do not grow in fields, and we need to make sure that we can use secondary waste streams, side streams, all of this needs to be brought into play as a source of carbon feedstock. And this is how other global regions are addressing this. So this is not about just Europe making up its mind to get there when it feels like it. It has to, because other global regions are already doing this. We got to talk about money. We always need more money. We need our innovators to be able to scale faster and bigger and reach the market much more quickly, so that Europe becomes a number one market choice rather than a second or even third market choice. We also want to make sure that as we transform conventional manufacturing, we can do this in a very strategic way, create lead markets for very key supply chains with conditions that suit what that supply chain needs. You know, make good use of tax, make good use of financial incentives so that those markets genuinely become established, because then we have achieved a huge success for Europe. There's a long list here, so I won't go through all of them, but I would also like to say Europe is a massive exporter of its biotechnology products, so it's really important that we continue to grow that capability. It's not just about for our own supply, it's how we use it as a real competitive lever on the global stage. And not just for financial purposes, this is also about how we are a leading global trusted partner, particularly for a technology such as biotechnology. If we aren't leading this as a trusted partner, who is? So there's a lot of things we can do in Biotech Act 2, and we hope that it is as broad as possible and ambitious as possible, and this is what we're working towards. But what we're going to talk about today and this week in Bioinnovations Conference is also our annual EFIB statement. EFIB is the European Forum for Industrial Biotech, and EuropaBio has run this platform as a forum for discussion for, I think, over 15 years now. And each year we put out a statement that goes, these are our priorities this year. Let's focus and talk about these. And our three priorities this year that will be published in our Den Haag statement, as Bioinnovations is the home to the 2026 EFIB statement. We have three main asks. We always ask the same questions every year. What do we want for regulation? What do we want for education? And what do we want for money? So this year's ask, in terms of regulation and policy, this is going to be our dedicated regulation for microorganisms. Let's really finish this job properly and modernise what Europe's biotechnology framework looks like. Our second ask on education and awareness, you never need to stop communicating about biotechnology. Always be out there, always be explaining what it does. But what we want to do now is we want policymakers to bring together voices that are future-looking and progressive. You will know, as communicators of biotechnology, that the messages are often the same as they were 30 years ago. It is really time to say, what do consumers really think? What do they really want? Because what we hear from research is substantially different than many of the very negative positions that we see either in the media or still held on to by policymakers. It's really time to change this. And finally, we would like financing frameworks to recognise the maturity of this sector now. We want EU funding to be able to recognise TRL levels above 7, really allow economic frameworks to cover those final steps to market. And we would like some of the really great economic initiatives proposed for Biotech 1 in health to be replicated for biomanufacturing in all sectors. We will be talking to policymakers all year about these three steps. We will also be discussing them tomorrow in our executive roundtable, hosted again in this conference. So it's a really good opportunity to bring policymakers and stakeholders at both member state and EU level to some of the key questions that we have. So I'm going to finish talking in a moment, which you'll be very glad to hear. But your voice is an incredibly important part of this conversation. EuropaBio can stand up and go, give us this. And everyone will go, yeah, well, you would say that, wouldn't you? Because you're EuropaBio. Your governments and your MEPs are deciding what happens to your company right now in terms of these legislative developments. And you may not like what they are about to do. And they're probably not doing these things because they don't like you. They simply don't know what has to be done. So we work with our amazing national associations to inform member state governments everywhere. You also should be talking to your governments. You should be part of your national associations and bringing the voice of your company up to policy level, because if you aren't doing it, nobody else is. It's incredibly important. And MEPs and your government are co-legislators. These guys really drive through what final legislation looks like, and they are doing these things right now. So Be part of your national associations, be part of EuropaBio, make sure that we can bring your amazing stories, because they are amazing stories, through to policymakers. Because whenever we talk to people and describe a company, describe an innovation, they are amazed at what they can do, but they won't know unless you tell them. So, I'm going to leave you to an amazing conference right now. You are extremely welcome to engage with EuropaBio fully over the next 2 days. As I said, I will see many of you in our workshops that we are running tomorrow. If you are an innovative SME, you are very welcome to come and talk to me about your coming to our SME breakfast at 8 a.m. tomorrow, if you can get up that early. And this is where we will publish an SME statement from the year to say, this is what SMEs need, do it. We will follow that with our executive roundtable, which is looking at the global landscape for industrialization of biotechnology and where it needs to go next. And finally, we finish it off on a nice technical note by looking at, in our approvals project workshop, how we bring innovation to the market through expanding regulatory sandboxes and indeed the sandbox concept outside regulatory applications. So there's something for everyone, but I would like to thank you all very much for enabling me to open your day, and I hope that you have lots of questions for me after I sit down. Thank you very much.